take it home, well, you spread it around. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. That's what election day is all about. And the biggest gun we got is called the ballot box. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. And she'll bring some new ones in, and they will start the show again. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out.
Growing up, my family went back and forth between lower middle class and working class. Yet even when they came home weary and bone-tired, my parents found a way to show us all who we could be. My librarian mother taught us to love learning. My father, a shipyard worker, put in overtime and extra shifts, and they made sure we volunteered to help others. Later, they both became United Methodist ministers, an expression of the faith that guides us. Family values, faith, service, education, and responsibility. Now, we only had one car, so sometimes my dad had to hitchhike and walk long stretches during the 30-mile trip home from the shipyards. One rainy night, my mom got worried. We piled in the car and went out looking for him, and we eventually found my dad making his way along the road, soaked and shivering in his shirt sleeves. When he got in the car, my mom asked if he'd left his coat at work. He explained that he'd given it to a homeless man he'd met on the highway. When we asked why he'd given away his only jacket, my dad turned to us and said, "I knew when I left that man he'd still be alone, but I could give him my coat because I knew you were coming for me." Our power and strength as Americans lives in our hard work and our belief in more. My family understood firsthand that while success is not guaranteed, we live in a nation where opportunity is possible. But we do not succeed alone. In these United States, when times are tough, we can persevere because our friends and neighbors will come for us. Our first responders will come for us. It is this mantra, this uncommon grace of community, that has driven me to become an attorney, a small business owner, a writer, and most recently, the Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia. My reason for running was simple. I love our country and its promise of opportunity for all. And I stand here tonight because I hold fast to my father's credo. Together, we are coming for America, for a better America. Just a few weeks ago, I joined volunteers to distribute meals to furloughed federal workers. They waited in line for a box of food and a sliver of hope since they hadn't received paychecks in weeks. Making livelihoods of our federal workers a pawn for political games is a disgrace. The shutdown was a stunt engineered by the President of the United States, one that defied every tenet of fairness and abandoned not just our people, but our values. For 7 years, I led the Democratic Party in the Georgia House of Representatives. I didn't always agree with the Republican speaker or governor, but I understood that our constituents didn't care about our political parties, they cared about their lives. So when we had to negotiate criminal justice reform or transportation or foster care improvements, the leaders of our state didn't shut down. We came together and we kept our word. It should be no different in our nation's capital. We may come from different sides of the political aisle, but our joint commitment to the ideals of this nation cannot be negotiable. Our most urgent work is to realize Americans' dreams of today and tomorrow, to carve a path to independence and prosperity that can last a lifetime. Children deserve an excellent education from cradle to career. We owe them safe schools and the highest standards, regardless of zip code. Yet this White House responds timidly, while first graders practice active shooter drills, and the price of higher education grows ever steeper. From now on, our leaders must be willing to tackle gun safety measures and face the crippling effect of educational loans, to support educators and invest what is necessary to unleash the power of America's greatest minds. In Georgia and around the country, people are striving for a middle class where a salary truly equals economic security. But instead, families' hopes are being crushed by Republican leadership that ignores real life or just doesn't understand it. Under the current administration, far too many hard-working Americans are falling behind, living paycheck to paycheck, most without labor unions to protect them from even worse harm. The Republican tax bill rigged the system against working people. Rather than bringing back jobs, plants are closing, layoffs are looming, and wages struggle to keep pace with the actual cost of living. We owe more to the millions of everyday folks who keep our economy running, like truck drivers forced to buy their own rigs, farmers caught in a trade war, small business owners in search of capital, and domestic workers serving without labor protections. Women and men who could thrive if only they had the support and freedom to do so. We know bipartisanship could craft a 21st century immigration plan, but this administration chooses to cage children and tear families apart. Compassionate treatment at the border is not the same as open borders. President Reagan understood this. President Obama understood this. Americans understand this. And Democrats stand ready to effectively secure our ports and borders. But we must all embrace that from agriculture to healthcare to entrepreneurship, America is made stronger by the presence of immigrants, not walls. And rather than suing to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, as Republican attorneys general have, our leaders must protect the progress we've made and commit to expanding healthcare and lowering costs for everyone. My father has battled prostate cancer for years. To help cover the cost, I found myself sinking deeper into debt, because while you can defer some payments, you can't defer cancer treatment. In this great nation, Americans are skipping blood pressure pills, forced to choose between buying medicine or paying rent. Maternal mortality rates show that mothers, especially Black mothers, risk death to give birth. And in 14 states, including my home state, where a majority want it, our leaders refuse to expand Medicaid, which could save rural hospitals, save economies, and save lives. We can do so much more. Take action on climate change. Defend individual liberties with fair-minded judges. But none of these ambitions are possible without the bedrock guarantee of our right to vote. Let's be clear. Voter suppression is real. From making it harder to register and stay on the rolls, to moving and closing polling places, to rejecting lawful ballots, we can no longer ignore these threats to democracy. While I acknowledge the results of the 2018 election here in Georgia, I did not, and we cannot, accept efforts to undermine our right to vote. That's why I started a nonpartisan organization called Fair Fight to advocate for voting rights. This is the next battle for our democracy, one where all eligible citizens can have their say about the vision we want for our country. We must reject the cynicism that says allowing every eligible vote to be cast and counted is a power grab. Americans understand that these are the values our brave men and women in uniform and our veterans risk their lives to defend. The foundation of our moral leadership around the globe is free and fair elections, where voters pick their leaders, not where politicians pick their voters. In this time of division and crisis, we must come together and stand for and with one another. America has stumbled time and again on its quest towards justice and equality. But with each generation, We have revisited our fundamental truths, and where we falter, we make amends. We fought Jim Crow with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Yet we continue to confront racism from our past and in our present, which is why we must hold everyone from the highest offices to our own families accountable for racist words and deeds, and call racism what it is: wrong. America achieved a measure of reproductive justice in Roe v. Wade, but we must never forget it is immoral to allow politicians to harm women and families to advance a political agenda. We affirmed marriage equality, and yet the LGBTQ community remains under attack. So, even as I am very disappointed by the president's approach to our problems, I still don't want him to fail. But we need him to tell the truth, and to respect his duties, and respect the extraordinary diversity that defines America. Our progress has always been found in the refuge, in the basic instinct of the American experiment, to do right by our people. And with a renewed commitment to social and economic justice, we will create a stronger America together. Because America wins by fighting for our shared values against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is who we are. And when we do so, never wavering, the state of our union will always be strong. Thank you, and may God bless the United States of America.
The title of our episode on the 6th of February 2018, The Stateless Union. The Washington Post had a headline up that on the Trump State of the Union, the dissonant State of the Union speech, Trump seeks unity while depicting ruin, is it? Anyway, looking at the Webster Dictionary here is interesting. The dissonant is an adjective marked by incongruence, unsolved, harmonically unsolved. In other words, that is basically the root of it. It comes from the Latin word sore. You guessed it, sore means, here's a hint related to the derivatives of sore, supersonic resilience. It sounds as if it was sore, has something to do with the sound. If you're right, in fact, sore means to sound, is related to the Latin noun sonus, treating the sound. It's an ancient English word, sound. So, dissonant includes a negative situation also in harmonic, conflicting, and also clashing. So this is basically what they had to say about DJ Trump. DJ Trump confronted a split Congress for the first time Tuesday night by delivering a dissonant State of the Union address, interceding, uplifting to a bipartisan compromise with a chilling depiction of murder and ruin, calling the situation of the U.S. border an urgent national crisis. DJ Trump again called on Congress to approve the long-promised wall, in an argument without a physical barrier. Working-class Americans would lose their jobs and grip with dangerous crime and overcrowded schools and medical centers. He also cited an unmistakable trend to new Democratic House majority over implementing oversight investigations into his conduct and personal finances, as well as alleged corruption in the administration. The president warned that everyday Americans may suffer from what he termed ridiculous probes. An economic miracle is taking place in the U.S., and the only thing that can stop us now are foolish wars, politics, ridiculous partisan investigations. If there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigations, according to DJ Trump. What we've done here, when our part ends here, we have Stacey Abrams. She was a gubernatorial candidate in the state of Georgia. She gave the Democratic response. Then we go to our own Bernard Sanders. He is the junior senator from the state of Vermont. And Bernie will be talking about inequality and the real state of working people in the U.S. Very good response to this stateless union, or State of the Union, whatever you want to call it. And finally, we have a response from a working class party by Mr. Bechtel. He'll be given the working class response to the State of the Union. Bechtel is the chair of the CPUSA, and we thought we would give a left position here. And however you want to cut this up, Bernie Sanders, of course, representing the people. In many countries, it would be a social democrat response, but in the U.S., it is a socialist response. So we virtually have two socialist responses, and then we have a middle-of-the-road Democrat in Stacey Abrams, bringing all people together. This is what we're trying to do here at WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. It was noted by, I guess you'd say, the father of podcast statistics, Tom Cochran, that these types of the State of the Union, etc., you'll see a jump or a uptick in the number of people that tune into these various internet episodes, podcasts, whatever you want to call them. Usually something like anywhere from 10 to 15 and perhaps 20%. Our take on that is you will see some uptick, but a lot of that is smothered in the national networks all carrying it live, whether it be ABC, NBC, PBS, etc., the cable conglomerate, and other podcasts, whether it be Nate Silver, and we'll go to him in a minute. He doesn't have a podcast out yet, but there'll be all kinds of podcasts out. The BBC, the talking heads are busy. So I can recall back 20 years ago, the late, great Jerry Pippin and I were talking about this. And what happens is people, it wasn't as bad 20 years ago, but they temporarily get an overload. So thus, with the type of medium we have, they can go back and get some of the statistics. So we'll go into a little bit of polling here, and we'll explain what is actually going on here. Let's go quickly to Nate Silver. We don't want to spend too much time here. This is by Nate Silver. That's a wrap, he calls it. What went down in Trump's 2019 State of the Union. Effectively, he's the same thing here. This afternoon, I wrote more interesting than usual. I was more interesting than usual in the State of the Union address, and I sort of regret writing that. I don't think there was a lot of news in this speech. I don't think this is going to change much. The first and foremost reason I was interested is that I thought Trump might signal his strategy on the border wall, that is, whether he's willing to shut down the government again or declare a national emergency or whatever else. But he didn't really do that. It's not even clear that he had his strategy figured out. Now, arguably, the lack of a threat to shut down the government or declare a national emergency is itself noteworthy, pulling back from the brink, if you will, but there was also enough rhetoric about the importance of the wall, about the dangerous illegal immigrants, that I'm not sure I'd give too much credence to that theory. The second reason I'm interested is that I wanted to see if Trump would stick to what the White House teaser ahead of the time. They always give out in these state speeches some advance copy. They do give the advance copy out about an hour, but teasers, as he called them, a speech that truly signaled a pivot towards a more bipartisan approach. What he did do, if he had not talked so long, hadn't talked so long on immigration, he might have, but instead he used the very same sort of rhetoric, a standard stump speech, in other words, that he's used so many times before, including the demoralizing of immigrants, and there was very little in terms of substantive policy on stuff like infrastructure, which really could have a good opportunity, could be a good opportunity for Trump. And finally, I was interested in Stacey Abrams' response. It was good in the sense that it wasn't very newsworthy, since often these responses have been disasters. I'd have liked to see her have an even sharper focus on voting rights, and to have spoken to the audience that was actually reacting to the speech instead of just standing behind her like a Greek chorus. I kind of thought about that also. But as these things go, it was pretty decent. It wasn't tremendous. It isn't likely to do her more good. It's likely to do her more good than harm. Definitely there. The choreographing there, we can't put that on Stacey Abrams, because that is what the Democratic Party wanted to do. But overall, I don't think this is a newsworthy night. The president had some good moments and some bad moments, some funny moments and some awkward ones, and overall the speech was so much of a, I'd call it a boondoggle, but anyway, that it didn't really cohere into that is going to matter. Within a day or two, more interesting stories will enter the news cycle, and everyone would have forgotten about it. Even some of the better State of the Unions out there that Barack Obama introduced or sometimes forgotten about because of the old hodgepodge effect here, as he calls it, period. Thanks for following along with us tonight, everyone, and Nate will have some closing takeaways in a moment. We just had the closing takeaways here. Anyway, let's see what else we got here. I'm just looking down. Perry Beacon Jr. Anyway, these are just some various people that work here in terms of Abrams' future. This is Terry Beacon Jr. I feel like Trump could lose the 2020 election, but still win Georgia, dragging the GOP Senate candidate there too. I think 2 statewide losses is curtains for Abrams' career, so running in 2020 is a risk. In other words, if she decides to run in 2020. Nate Silver, Fox News panel line is that Abrams' response was well delivered, especially given that it was a hard speech to tackle, but it was too pessimistic. Well, I didn't sense her as pessimistic. I sensed that she was actually upbeat, optimistic, talked about her parents. The CNN panel, this is from Mika Cohen, gave Abrams good marks. And from Nathan Ratchey, Abrams is actually on the recording saying that her intention is to run for president in 2028. Well, could be. Run for president, huh? Well, she possibly could run for president given the crop that we have. Incidentally, I was looking at a newspaper article out of the Midwest, the Twin Cities, that Amy Klobuchar on Sunday will hold a mass rally outside to tell the people whether or not she's going to run. Well, I assume the logic here, the common reasoning would be that she will, or she wouldn't be outside in the cold, and possibly could be in the snow. And given that it's in Minnesota, Anything could happen. Abrams' speech that was totally about voting issues would have been much better. Well, again, that's a little bit different there. Voter suppression, this is Perry Beacon here, is real and strong, and she talked about this. This is Abrams. I think it would have been better if you focused just on one theme, do literally 100% speech, or 95% on voting rights. The problem is, if you did your whole speech on voting rights, you would turn off some of the audience. You're trying to get the biggest possible audience, so you have to talk about the strides of women, you have to talk about the working class, working people, and she talked about that. Her family moved from being in the middle or lower middle class, wherever you wanted to put them. Her mother was a librarian, her father worked in the shipyard, and then they turned into ministers, talked about her father's struggle with prostate cancer. We can sympathize with that one. It is kind of difficult to quickly react to what the president actually said. This is Godfrey Skilling. He used to be over at Sabato's place. So, whatever you need to say. And some others here, Perry Beacon Jr., she is doing everything weird that would hurt her political. She's not, excuse me. Being picked for this is a big for her, no doubt. She also is on the Super Bowl. It keeps the buzz about running for the Senate going, whether or not she runs or not. No, you should just say whatever the hell you want. There's Nate Silver there. And Perry Beacon Jr., Abrams gave an interesting speech, had a great sense of humor. She did indeed. This is a speech that sounds like it was written by Nancy Pelosi and Schumer's staff, but because I'm sure they did have some input, probably did. That's probably some of the problems. Anyway, let's see. From Merida Conroy, I think Abrams is smart to start with the shutdown. Several Democrats brought furlough workers as guests. Well, she did do that. Like Elizabeth Warren, who invited, and I'm not going to try to get her name going here. The delivery was bad in the first couple of minutes because she was speaking too fast. Probably nervous, no doubt about that. I agree there. Yeah, that was a little bit off there. You'll hear it incidentally. Nate Silver, why are people randomly standing behind her? It's like somebody said, it's awkward to speak without an audience, and so instead they managed to find an equally awkward way to make it look like in the Greek pyramids or something. Anyway, speaking to the base isn't going to get Trump his wall. That's Godfrey Skilling. That's a very good point that he made. And let me see what else we got going here. But why are speeches so hard at Vox? Put it in, this is Andrew Pocock, Procock, I guess, put it in 2016. Part of the problem is that the opposition party never has a venue that matches that of the president. No doubt about that. The audience has already sat through a long speech. Well, there's no doubt about that also. You speak of this. Like the Republican Bobby Gentle, we don't know where he is. In 2009, long-serving politicians like Democrat Steve Beshear to deliver a compelling rebuttal. Steve Beshear, if I remember, did a good job. Initially, it looked like the Democrats' selection of Abrams this year would be evident that the party had worked through some of its internal conflicts. Abrams appeared to a different segment of the Democratic base and presented a clear voice of resistance to Trump. Having Abrams give the official response also might indicate that Democrats are willing to embrace some new ideas, new people to be the face of the party. But the official response from progressives, African Americans, plus the Spanish language response hadn't stopped. Bernie Sanders of the Working Family Party from planning their own version. Yes, Bernie had a very good one. Bernie was very good in his delivery. You'll hear that in a minute. And so was Mr. Bechtel. And the left compete to hear next year's response to the State of the Union will be doing the lead up to the 2010 there. and there will be a rebuttal to reflect each of the many candidates who are expected to vie for the nomination. There's no doubt there will be a lot of candidates there. We can kind of bet on that one. And let me just go to Real Clear Politics. I just want to make something clear here on the race, and then we'll do the sports. We said to sort of break the... we forgot about Northam. Didn't have anything to say about him. I was looking at Real Clear. They usually have a lot of articles. We encourage people to do that. You know, stumbling his way to the Mideast retreat. Anyway. Incidentally, there will be a summit in Vietnam with Kim Jong-un, the leader of the Democratic Republic of Korea, known as North Korea. He and DJ Trump will sit down in Vietnam. This is on Monday, incidentally, and we went on this poll before, but let me just give the numbers here. This is Democratic presidential nomination 2020. Joe Biden at 29%, and Bernie Sanders 16%, Beto O'Rourke 7%, Harris had 11%, that's Harris of California, Elizabeth Warren 8%, Twitter King Booker 4%. And I won't mess with the rest of them there. They're in the low, lonely numbers. And on Sunday, we had another poll out. Biden had 29%. Bernie got his 15%. Harris, surprisingly enough, this is an Emerson poll out of Boston, had 18% in this poll. Warren had 11%. They were all bunched up together. Beto O'Rourke in the single digits with 6%. Amy Klobuchar at 3%. I really wouldn't... worry about this particular one, but what I did look at more than anything else is the matchups at this point in time. DJ Trump 53 to Harris 47, Biden 51, DJ Trump a fairly close one there at 49, DJ Trump 50 to 49, 1 point, the dead heat with Bernie Sanders. DJ Trump and Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis O'Rourke out of El Paso, Texas. He's up by 6, old DJ Trump was. He's up by 8 over Gillibrand. He is up by 9. This is Brown, Shed Brown, senator from Ohio, from the Appalachian part of Ohio. And finally, if they, and this is a person asked me about this tonight. This would be Trump, Warren, and Schultz. Or is it Schwartz? Anyway, Schwartz. Let's see. Schwartz. Trump has 29. Elizabeth Warren has 40, and Schultz came in here. Schwartz, I should say, came in here with the formerly of Starbucks fame, with 11, so it would give him the election. Schwartz is a libertarian type candidate, a little bit talking about that. And it would go back to January the 3rd, just looking at some of these polls here. Joe Biden is still he's in the 30s, and in this poll, Bernie Sanders had 15, basically about the same. O'Rourke had his 6, and Harris was down at 10, and so forth and so on in the single digits there. Klobuchar and company in that. We had some, I don't think we'll have it here. Well, here's a PPP poll. This is way back in January the 22nd. Biden had 53 to 41 in their poll over DJ Trump. Warren was 48 to 42. Harris was 48 to 41 over DJ Trump, up by 7. Beto O'Rourke 47 to 41. All of these, and Bernie was up by 10. Twitter King Booker was even beaten. This was out of North Carolina. A little different situation. Now, incidentally, the Washington Post came up with a some type of a registration card, a card that Elizabeth Warren signed in longhand or ballpoint pen, whatever, that said she was an American Oprah Winfrey. And I don't see the Elizabeth Warren story for her. Hopefully it dropped off. It's somewhere else. Anyway, we'll get it later, and we'll look at it. They also have all these former LA mentioned. Anyway, let's do the sports. Basically, our thoughts on the so-called Stateless Union, or the State of the Union, was that the State of the Union, according to DJ Trump, very negative situation. He was talking about the economy being very good. Bernie Sanders, you listen to Bernie countered that particular situation. He does a very good job. We won't go into it here. But basically, the cost of living. A gentleman and I were talking about that tonight, the cost of living, and people making, say, $15 to $20 an hour, particularly someone that's married and with children, very, very difficult to survive. And seniors on $14,000 or $10,000 or whatever the limit there, very, very difficult to survive there. So these are some of the realistic things that are actually going on. Let's do the sports very quickly. We'll start with college basketball. We had Missouri at Tennessee. Tennessee 72 to 60. We have Boston College at Duke. It was Duke 80 to 55. South Carolina was at Kentucky, a basketball school, powerhouse, 76 to 48. Michigan was at Rutgers. Michigan 77 to 65 there. North Carolina State at North Carolina 113 to 96. High scoring game there, North Carolina. Then we have Michigan and the Illini of Illinois 79 to 74. St. John's and Marquette out of Milwaukee. Anyway, it was a 1-point game. St. John's had 70 to 69, and Kansas State still always be a good game. It was Kansas State 74 to 67, and finally Florida State and Syracuse. It was all Florida State 80 to 62. On to the NBA. The Clippers were at the Hornets. It was the Clippers 117 to 115. The Celtics were at the Cavaliers in Cleveland. The Celtics 103 to 96. The Lakers at the Pacers. It was the Pacers 136 to 94 for the Lakers. The Pistons at the Knickerbockers. It was the Pistons 105 to the Knicks 92. The Raptors at the 76ers. It was the Raptors 119 to 107. The T-Wolves were at the Grizzlies. It was a 2-point game. Grizzlies at 108 to 106. The Magic was at the Thunder in OKC. It was the Thunder 132 to 122. And finally, the Heat was out in Portland, and the Heat actually pulled this game out 118 to 108. And on to the National Hockey League. And no music tonight. The Islanders were at the Bruins. It was the Bruins 3 to 1. The Wild was at the Sabres. It was the Sabres 5 to 4. And the Blues and the Panthers. It was the Blues of St. Louis, the Kings and the Devils. The final there, Kings 5 to 1. Or is that 6 to 1? I have my glasses on. I always have to look at these things and see what's going on here. Yeah, 5 to 1. Okay. The Hurricanes and Penguins. The Hurricanes shut out the Penguins 4-0. The Canucks and Capitals. It was the Capitals 3 to 2. The Ducks of Anaheim and the Canadiens. It was Canadiens 4 to 1. The Golden Knights of Las Vegas 3 to 2 over the Lightning. And the Coyotes and Predators. Predators 5 to 2. The Sharks and Jets in an overtime. It was the Sharks 2 to 1 over the Winnipeg Jets. The Blue Jackets and Avalanche. It was the Blue Jackets 6 to 3. And the Blackhawks and Oilers. It was the Blackhawks 6 to 2. Ah, yes. Anyway, that does the sports, and on to Stacey Abrams, and then Bernie Sanders, and then Mr. Bechtel of the CPUSA to give the working class response. Have a good day, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. It was the Stateless Union was the title of this episode on the 6th of February, 2019 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is Boston Red himself from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. We had to get that in. Good day.
Let me thank all of you for joining me tonight. I know that it is late, and I'm not going to go on for too long. And let me also just congratulate Stacey Abrams for her very, very effective response to President Trump's State of the Union. Now we, I think, all know why she would have been a wonderful governor of Georgia. I know that this will probably not shock you, but I hate to say this, but not everything Donald Trump said tonight was true or accurate. Tonight, when we talk about the economy, tonight and on numerous occasions since he has taken office, President Trump has told the American people that the U.S. economy is the hottest economy anywhere in the world, that it is really booming. Well, that may be true for the members of his Mar-a-Lago country club, where the price of admission has doubled to $200,000. For those folks who go to Trump's club, and for the wealthiest people in our nation, Trump is right. The economy is really booming. In fact, for many of President Trump's billionaire friends, the truth is they have never, ever had it so good. But for the middle class and for the working families of our country, the truth is that the economy is not so great. Over the last year, for example, real inflation accounted for wages for the average American worker is up by all of 1.2%, just $9.11 a week. In fact, real wages for that same worker, that average American worker, are lower today than they were in 1973. Let me repeat that. The average American worker, after adjusting for inflation, is earning less today than he or she did 46 years ago, despite huge increases in productivity. Sadly, millions of American workers are now forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to pay the bills and to keep their heads above water economically. In America today, and somehow or another, President Trump didn't mention this in his speech, we have more wealth and income inequality than almost any major country on earth. And it is more unfair, more unequal now than at any other time since the Gilded Age of the 1920s. Yes, the economy is great for the 3 wealthiest people in America who own more wealth than the bottom half of our country, 160 million Americans. Yes, the economy is great for the top 1%, who now earn 46% of all new income in our economy. Yes, the economy is great for the top 25 hedge fund managers on Wall Street, who made nearly twice as much income last year as all 140,000 kindergarten teachers in our country. 25 hedge fund managers. Yeah, the economy is great for the 5 richest people in America who have seen their wealth go up by over $100 billion since Trump was elected, and for corporations that have announced over $1 trillion in stock buybacks in 2018 alone. Yes, the economy may be great for those folks, but it is absolutely not booming for the nearly 80% of American workers who live paycheck to paycheck, desperately hoping that their child doesn't get sick, praying that their car doesn't break down, or that they don't lose their job. Despite what President Trump says, this is not a hot economy when 43% of households can't afford to pay for housing, food, childcare, health care, transportation, and a cell phone without going into debt. That is not a hot economy for ordinary Americans. The economy is not booming when half of Americans 55 years of age and older have no idea how they will live out the last years of their lives with dignity because they have no retirement savings. And that includes, unbelievably, 20% of seniors trying to survive on incomes of less than $14,000 a year. And I just don't know how anybody, certainly not a senior citizen, survives on $14,000 a year. This is not the strongest economy we have ever had, according to Trump, when hundreds of thousands of young people are unable to go to college because they can't afford it, and millions more are struggling with outrageous levels of student debt, when over 34 million Americans have no health insurance, when 1 out of 5 of our people cannot afford the medicine prescribed to them by their doctors, and when over 40 million people in our country are living in poverty. This is not an economy we should be proud of when we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the developed world, and when life expectancy in the United States has actually gone down for the 3rd year in a row. And as we speak tonight, let us not forget that in America, millions of our people are working for starvation wages, $8 an hour, $9 an hour, $10 an hour. And here is the simple truth. Nobody can raise a family or pay the rent or take care of the necessities of life on these poverty wages. But you know what? I didn't hear Donald Trump talk about raising the minimum wage to a living wage at least $15 an hour. Somehow didn't talk about that. Tonight, President Trump talked about what a great job he has done on trade. But what he forgot to tell you is that the annual trade deficit has gone up by over $100 billion since he became president. And our trade deficit with China and Mexico has gone up by tens of billions of dollars. Meanwhile, since Trump was elected, corporations have shipped 185,000 American jobs overseas. President Trump also talked tonight about the need to rebuild our country's crumbling infrastructure, our roads and our bridges and our water systems and our wastewater plants. And he is absolutely right. It is an absolute disgrace that in the wealthiest nation on earth we have an infrastructure that is crumbling. But the proposal that he is bringing forth is dead wrong. It is an absurd proposal. Trump would encourage states to sell our nation's highways, our bridges, and other vital infrastructure to Wall Street, to wealthy campaign contributors, even to foreign governments. The reality is that Trump's plan to privatize our nation's infrastructure is an old idea that has never worked and, in fact, never will work. President Trump said tonight, quote, "We are born free and we will stay free," end of quote. Well, I say to President Trump, people are not truly free when they can't afford to go to the doctor when they are sick. People are not truly free when they cannot afford to buy the prescription drugs they desperately need. People are not truly free when they are unable to retire with dignity. People are not truly free when they are exhausted because they are working longer and longer hours for lower wages. People are not truly free when they cannot afford a decent place in which to live. People certainly are not free when they cannot afford to feed their families. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1968, and I quote, "This country has socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor," end quote. What Dr. King said then was true and it is true today, and it remains absolutely unacceptable. Tonight, Donald Trump, who in less than 2 years in the White House has seen 5 aides either plead guilty or be convicted of criminal charges, claimed the strength of the economy was dependent on him being free from necessary oversight and investigations into wrongdoing by both his campaign and his administration. The exact opposite is true. America's strength is based on the rule of law and the fact that no one, not even the President of the United States, is above it. Tonight, in terms of crime, Trump talked about a terrible and heinous murder in Reno, Nevada, committed by an undocumented immigrant who happens to be Latino. In fact, as I think many of you will recall, over the last several years, Trump has talked time and time again about crimes committed by undocumented Latino immigrants. His demonization of Latinos is nothing less than racist. It is wrong, and it also happens to be factually inaccurate. Undocumented Latino immigrants commit fewer crimes in the United States than the general public. But I want you to think about something for a moment. Isn't it strange that when we talk about terrible crimes committed in the United States or in the state of Nevada, Donald Trump forgot to mention that in 2017, a white man named Stephen Paddock killed 58 people and wounded 851 in the deadliest shooting in modern American history. That also happened in Nevada. Now, how come Trump didn't mention that? If he is concerned about crime, how come Trump didn't talk about one of the worst mass murders in American history? Needless to say, he also didn't mention the need for common sense gun safety legislation, which would lower the terrible rate of mass shootings in our country. Tonight, Donald Trump repeated some of the most extreme anti-woman attacks coming from the far right. At a time when we see an unprecedented and coordinated attack against a woman's right to choose, it is incredibly important that we fight to make sure that every woman in this country has the right to control her own body. Tonight, Donald Trump correctly talked about the need to address the opioid crisis. Well, President Trump, you don't help people suffering from opioid addiction by writing a budget which calls for a $1 trillion cut to Medicaid. That would be a devastating moment in the fight against opioid addiction. Now, as important as it is to respond to what President Trump said tonight, it is even more important to discuss some of what Trump refused to talk about, which happens to include some of the most important issues facing our country and the entire world. Now, how can a president of the United States give a State of the Union speech and not mention, not one word, about climate change when the leading scientists of the world tell us that climate change is real, that climate change is caused by human activity, and that climate change is already causing devastating harm in the United States and in much of the world? Further, the scientists tell us that we have a very short 12 years, not a lot of time, in order to transform our energy system away from fossil fuels and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy if we are going to have a planet that is healthy and habitable for our children and our grandchildren. Somehow or another, Donald Trump just forgot to talk about that. Trump also forgot to discuss the international embarrassment of the United States being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a right. Now, how can he ignore the fact that we spend far more per capita on health care than any other country on earth, while at the same time tens of millions of our fellow Americans are uninsured or underinsured? Somehow or another, Trump forgot to get to that issue. How can President Trump not discuss the terrible attacks that we are seeing to undermine the fundamentals of American democracy, which includes the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision that allows billionaires to buy elections? Trump talked a lot about freedom tonight, but somehow or another, he didn't talk about governors' efforts all across this country, governors who are trying to suppress the vote and make it harder for poor people or people of color to vote. You can't talk about freedom in America and ignore the massive amounts of voter suppression taking place, denying people the right to participate in our democracy. Donald Trump talked about the economy, but he forgot to mention the fact that state after state is doing the right thing and is raising the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. But I didn't hear President Trump say that he would work with me and with other advocates of a living wage to raise the minimum wage at the federal level to $15 an hour. Somehow didn't get into that. How could President Trump not mention the words Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid in his State of the Union speech when he promised over and over again during his campaign, you remember that? That he would not cut these programs? Could it be because his budget proposed massive cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security in direct violation of his campaign pledge? How could Trump not talk about the reality that Russia, through cyber warfare, interfered in our election in 2016, is interfering in democratic elections all over the world, and according to the heads of his own national security agencies, attempted to interfere in the 2018 midterm elections? How can the president say nothing about Yemen, where the humanitarian crisis where the worst humanitarian crisis in the world is currently taking place, brought on by a Saudi-led war that the United States is supporting? And just yesterday, a CNN report detailed how our Saudi and Emirati allies have been giving U.S.-made weapons to al-Qaeda-linked fighters in Yemen and have also fallen into the hands of Iranian-backed Houthi rebels. This war is a disaster, which is why the Senate passed a resolution that I sponsored last December, calling on the president to end our support for that terrible war, and why colleagues in both the House and the Senate reintroduced that legislation last week. This is an enormously important foreign policy issue. It speaks to our relationship with a despotic regime in Saudi Arabia. Somehow Trump forgot to mention that. President Trump has stated tonight and over and over and over and over again that building a wall on the Mexican border is a national emergency. In fact, he shut down the government and caused enormous pain and uncertainty for some 800,000 federal employees who were forced to go to work but were not paid, all because of his insistence on that wall. No, President Trump, building a wall is not an emergency. In terms of immigration in this country, what we need to do is not to waste billions of dollars on a wall, but to finally address the need for comprehensive immigration reform, including a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented people. It is inhumane and not what America stands for, that tiny children at the border have been torn apart from their parents. It is disgraceful that 1.8 million young people raised in the United States and who know no other country but the United States have lost their legal protection under the DACA program because of Trump's actions. It is heartbreaking that almost 11 million undocumented people living in this country, the overwhelming majority of whom are hardworking and law-abiding, worry every day about being deported and separated from their loved ones. What a president of the United States is supposed to do, and I think in a certain sense almost all presidents in recent history have understood that, is that when you're president, you bring our people together, whether they're black or white or Latino, whether they're Asian American, Native American, whether they're men or women, whether they're gay or straight. That's what a president is supposed to do. But in an unprecedented way, that is not what this president is doing. In fact, he is trying to divide us up. He is trying to have one group turn against another group. And that is certainly not what this country is supposed to be about. Trump said tonight that we should, quote, govern not as two parties, but as one nation. I agree. But Trump's agenda of providing tax breaks to billionaires while throwing millions of Americans off of health insurance is the exact opposite of what the American people want. If Trump truly wants to govern in a bipartisan manner, let's take a look at what the overwhelming majority of the American people want. In other words, I know this is a radical idea, but I say to the President of the United States, why don't you do what the American people want you to do rather than what wealthy campaign contributors want? Let me give you some examples. A Fox News poll conducted last month shows that 70% of Americans support a tax increase on families making over $10 million. According to Reuters, 70% of the American people, including 52% of Republicans, support Medicare for all. They understand that the current health system is not working, and they want to join every other country on earth in making health care a right, not a privilege. Another poll found that 72% of the American people, including 51% of Republicans, want to expand Social Security benefits, make sure that our elderly people can retire in dignity, and do that by increasing taxes on millionaires and billionaires. According to Gallup, 76% of the American people, including large majorities of Republicans and Democrats, want us to spend $1 trillion on an infrastructure plan to create up to 15 million good-paying jobs. The Kaiser Family Foundation has found that 92% of Americans want Medicare to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to lower prescription drug prices. 92%. That same poll also found that 72% of Americans, including 3/4 of Republicans, want the freedom to buy low-cost prescription drugs from Canada. Gallup tells us that 64% of Americans, including 51% of Republicans, believe marijuana should be legal. And that tells me that we should end the disastrous war on drugs. Quinnipiac tells us that Americans support by over 94% requiring background checks for all gun purchases. CBS has found that 87% of Americans, including 79% of Republicans, want to allow immigrants who are brought to the United States as children to stay in our country. And according to a July 2018 survey paid for by the Koch brothers, 66% of Americans believe, quote, government-paid college tuition is an effective solution to social barriers. 65% of Americans believe that a $15 minimum wage is an effective solution to low wages. 69% of Americans believe that we need more regulation of Wall Street. And 69% of Americans also believe we should be increasing government assistance for child care. My fellow Americans, if the overwhelming majority of Americans want us to pass these enormously popular initiatives, why can't Congress pass them? Why isn't Congress and the White House doing what the American people want them to do? And the answer, frankly, is not complicated. The answer has everything to do with the power of the moneyed interests. Wall Street, big drug companies, huge health insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry, multinational corporations in the billionaire class. All of these groups are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to get Congress to do their bidding. But while they may have the money, and God only knows they have an endless supply of money, we have something that is more powerful on our side, and that is that we have the people. They have the money, we have the people. If we are serious about transforming our country, if we are serious about rebuilding the shrinking middle class, if we are serious about reinvigorating our democracy and increasing voter turnout and bringing young people into the political process, let us bring our people together to take on and defeat a ruling class whose greed is destroying our nation. The billionaire class must learn that they cannot have it all. Our government belongs to each and every one of us, not just the few. Together, let us fight for economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. Let us end unbridled greed. Let us create the kind of America that we know we can become. Thank you all.
My name is John Bechtel, National Chair of the Communist Party USA, and welcome to our response to the State of the Union address. Our country and world are at a crossroads. Both humanity and nature face existential crises. We face a climate catastrophe and an escalating nuclear war danger. We are at a crossroads where a few billionaires concentrate extraordinary wealth, while millions of working-class families barely make ends meet. Despite Donald Trump's rosy numbers tonight, 40% of workers are outside of the workforce, the most in our nation's history. Many have given up looking for work. Where youth are mired in mountains of college debt, where African American and Native youth and other youth of color face generational unemployment, and where social inequality has grown. We are at a crossroads, facing the most corrupt presidential administration in our history, a crossroads where democracy and the truth are under daily assault, and where the danger of fascism has grown. Where children fear that they will be slaughtered in their classrooms by a gunman. These things are truly frightening. Yet Trump's speech tonight tried to instill fear of a different sort, a nightmare of hordes of Mexicans, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, and Hondurans overrunning our border with crime, violence, and drugs. Trump is lying about just about every aspect of the border crisis and immigration. And for that matter, he lied about just about everything else tonight, and I'm sure the fact checkers will be very busy all night and tomorrow. In reality, these are our working class brothers and sisters and their children and infants. They are refugees desperately fleeing violence rooted in U.S. corporate exploitation and militarization. Victorina Morales was seated in the audience tonight listening to Trump. She is one of 11 million undocumented workers in this country. She worked for years at one of the Trump properties, making his bed and washing his clothes. She barely earned enough to raise her family while he enriched himself. Victorina Morales spoke out against Trump's hypocrisy, and she and her co-workers, who were also undocumented, were fired. We, the American people, will not turn our backs on Victorina Morales. In November 2018, a majority of Americans voted to reject Trump's anti-working class, anti-people, and anti-planet agenda. The political landscape in the country has shifted dramatically. Coast to coast, women, people of color, trade unionists, socialists, and grassroots activists were elected to champion the urgent issues facing our nation. Drawing upon our greatest revolutionary ideals, Americans increasingly embrace diversity, equality, and solidarity. We are one multiracial working class, native and foreign-born, men and women, gay and straight, united in the recognition that an injury to one is an injury to all. Trump's border wall is a symbol of white supremacy and anti-immigrant hate and racism, and is aimed at dividing the American people. The expulsion of our immigrant brothers and sisters, tear gassing of refugees, separation of families, and caging of children is inhuman and immoral. Trump's government shutdown over the wall was an assault on democracy, the role of government and public workers. 800,000 federal employees were forced to go without paychecks. Millions were denied vital government services, and public safety was endangered. Again, Trump lost because the overwhelming majority of the American people and their Democratic elected officials were united to oppose the shutdown and the wall. And because air traffic controllers, TSA agents, food inspectors, and other government employees and their unions took matters into their own hands and stopped going to work. Trump is becoming more dangerous the more he loses. He is becoming more desperate as the Mueller investigation challenges the very legitimacy of his presidency. By fostering a coup in Venezuela to overthrow an elected government and threatening regime change in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Iran, the Trump administration and its extreme right-wing corporate backers are endangering world peace, democratic rights, and national sovereignty of other countries. Most people, with the notable exception of Trump, were outraged by foreign intervention in the 2016 elections. We should be equally outraged when the U.S. interferes in the internal affairs of other countries. We won't cooperate with this agenda. By declaring a trade war with China, he is threatening an economic crisis and destabilization of the global economy. We won't cooperate with that agenda. And he and the military and fossil fuel corporations are endangering the entire planet by sparking a new nuclear arms race with Russia, pursuing a $2 trillion nuclear modernization, the weaponization of space, and withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords. We will not cooperate with that agenda. A majority of Americans reject these pro-corporate and anti-working class policies. Instead, they are responding to a new people's agenda that matches the immense challenges we face. This agenda includes a new Green Deal, a Green New Deal, to transition to a green, demilitarized economy, to build a modern infrastructure and employ millions at union wages with affirmative action. The new People's Agenda includes immigration reform with a path to citizenship, Medicare for all that makes health care a right, a health care system that guarantees reproductive rights and addresses the opioid crisis caused by the pharmaceutical industry. It includes full equality based on race, gender, and sexual identity and orientation. Free university tuition and the cancellation of all student debt. Gun control, including universal background checks and the banning of assault weapons. The elimination of the Electoral College, an end to voter suppression and gerrymandering, and the removal of corporate money from politics. Taxing the rich and a radical redistribution of wealth and income. A peaceful foreign policy, respect for national sovereignty, and global cooperation to solve global crises. Yes, we are at a crossroads, and this agenda can unite people in a powerful movement to oust Trump and the GOP and their corporate backers from Congress, governorships, state legislatures in 2020. And by electing in their place a progressive-oriented government at every level, the door can open to a new era of struggle that puts people and nature before corporate profits, where the working class and people can govern, where a green, collaborative, peaceful socialist society of full economic and political democracy and equality can be built. So thanks for listening. We want to hear your thoughts too. Together, we can build a better world. Good night.